era before and during the Dance of the Dragons, is when the world sees the most living dragons since the Doom of Valyria. Bear in mind, during Aegon's conquest, we know of only 3 living dragons, with some of the wild dragons implied to be as old, and possibly there being some hatchlings we don't know of. By the time we get to the reign of King Jaehaerys I and into the dance proper, there are several riders bonded to dragons. In this video, we're going to be talking about the history and lore of all of these bonded dragons who took part in the dance. Some have huge roles, some very minor, but each has their role to play and some interesting lore behind them. Vhagar grows old, but her fires still burn hot. Visenya Targaryen to King Rhaenys I, Fire and Blood, the Sons of the Dragon. At the time of the Dance of the Dragons, Vhagar is the largest and oldest living dragon, the only one of the 3 Aegon the Conqueror used in the conquest still living. The precise appearance of Vhagar is only partially described within the history and lore, while some chronicles do not record the colour of her scales, horns and wings, spine crest, or even the hue of her flames. Later clarification provided by George R. R. Martin describes her as a great bronze dragon with greenish blue highlights, bright eyes, and a fearsome presence, one of the greatest dragons to have ever lived. Her immense size becoming the stuff of legend. Tyrion Lannister later claims that a horse could be ridden down Vhagar's throat, a colourful comparison that nevertheless conveys the extraordinary scale of the dragon. Such was the heat of her breath that it was said to melt a knight's armour where he stood, cooking the man alive within his steel shell. By the time of the dance, Vhagar had survived a century of wars and conquest, emerging a battle-hardened veteran of countless campaigns. She had grown almost as large as Balerion the Black Dread himself, and stood as the oldest and largest living dragon in Westeros. Her roar was said to shake the very foundations of Storm's End, whilst no dragon still living could rival her in either size or ferocity. Vhagar's first known rider was Queen Visenya Targaryen, who rode her during the conquest, where she would play a key part in several battles, such as the Field of Fire. They would also play a key role during the first invasion of Dawn and the subsequent Dragon's Wrath. Vhagar remained unridden for 29 years after Visenya's death, spending much of that time on Dragonstone and later residing in the Dragon Pit of King's Landing. It was in 73 AC, Prince Baelon the Brave, after achieving knighthood, set out to follow his brother Prince Aemond and become a dragon rider, claiming Vhagar. Vhagar, along with Caraxes and Vermithor, burnt down the Dornish fleet that attempted to invade the Stormlands during the 4th Dornish War in 83 AC. After the death of Balerion of old age in 94, Vhagar became the last of the 3 Targaryen dragons who had fought in the conquest. Vhagar became riderless once again when Prince Baelon suddenly died in 101 AC. Her next rider was Lady Rhaenyra Targaryen, who succeeded in claiming the ancient beast before reaching her 12th birthday. According to the Maesters of Driftmark, Rhaenyra's greatest joy was to fly, and few dragon riders were said to have delighted so completely in the freedom of the skies. When Rhaenyra wed Prince Daemon Targaryen in 115 AC, the pair spent much of their marriage journeying across the 3 cities. Mounted upon Vhagar and Caraxes, they flew to Pentos, Volantis, Cahor, and Norvos. Wherever the 2 dragons descended, great crowds gathered to witness them, for few living men had ever beheld a creature of such size and majesty. Following the birth of Rhaenyra and Baela in 116 AC, Daemon returned to Westeros with both Caraxes and Vhagar. Thereafter, Rhaenyra and Daemon grew especially close to Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen, and the 3 were often seen flying their dragons together. The companionship came to an end in 120 AC when Rhaenyra died during childbirth. It is said that in her final moments she sought to reach Vhagar so she might take to the skies one last time, but her strength failed before she could do so. Following Rhaenyra's funeral upon Driftmark, the ancient dragon remained riderless only briefly. Before long, the 10-year-old Prince Aemond Targaryen approached the mighty Vhagar and claimed her as his own, forging one of the most formidable dragon-riding partnerships in the history of House Targaryen. By 129 AC, Vhagar had now grown as large as Balerion had been during the conquest, and was the greatest living dragon in Westeros. Mounted by Prince Aemond, she flew to Storm's End to secure the support of Lord Boros Baratheon for King Aegon II. There, Aemond encountered Prince Jacaerys Velaryon, who had come seeking the Lord's allegiance for Queen Rhaenyra. Though forbidden from attacking Jacaerys beneath Boros's roof, Aemond pursued him once he departed Storm's End. Amidst the storms over Shipbreaker Bay, Vhagar fell upon the smaller Arrax, killing both dragon and rider. Days later, the broken body of Arrax washed ashore. Throughout the dance, Vhagar remained the Green's greatest weapon. At Rook's Rest, she and Sunfyre overwhelmed Princess Rhaenys and her dragon Meleys. Though Meleys fought fiercely, she was slain whilst Vhagar emerged largely unhurt. The battle left King Aegon gravely wounded, and Aemond assumed the role of Prince Regent. Seeking to destroy Prince Daemon Targaryen, he flew Vhagar to Harrenhal, only to discover the castle abandoned after Daemon had lured him away from King's Landing. Following the fall of the city, Aemond abandoned Sir Criston Cole's army and embarked on a brutal campaign across the Riverlands. Village after village was put to the torch, and Vhagar became the terror of the Trident. Yet devastation came at a cost, for without Vhagar's protection, Criston Cole's army was surrounded and destroyed at the Butcher's Ball. Prince Daemon and the Dragonseed Nettles were dispatched to hunt Aemond, but despite an extensive search, they failed to bring Vhagar to battle. At last, after the first Battle of Tumbleton, Daemon challenged Aemond to meet him at Harrenhal. 2 weeks later, Vhagar appeared in the skies. The two greatest surviving dragons met above the God's Eye. As Vhagar and Caraxes locked strength in the sky, Daemon leapt from his saddle and drove the Valyrian steel sword Dark Sister through Aemond's remaining eye. Locked in mortal combat, both dragons crashed into the lake below, killing rider and beasts alike. Years later, Vhagar's immense skeleton was recovered from the waters, with Aemond's armoured bones still chained to her saddle. Thus perished the last living dragon of Aegon's conquest, at 181 years of age. Syrax was a she-dragon ridden solely by Rhaenyra Targaryen. Her name was said to be chosen by Rhaenyra herself, after a goddess of old Valyria. Her scales were yellow, and while she was a huge and formidable dragon by the time of the dance, she lacked the battle experience of older dragons such as Caraxes. Kept well-fed and often confined, Syrax had not hunted for many years before the war began. Rhaenyra first claimed Syrax in 104 AC, when she was only 7 years old. At the time, Syrax was still described as a young dragon, and because Rhaenyra herself bestowed her name, it's generally believed she had never carried a rider before. During the reign of King Jaehaerys I, Syrax laid several clutches of eggs, while Caraxes is speculated to have fathered at least some of them. Her final clutch was produced shortly before the outbreak of the dance. One of those eggs was given to Rhaenyra Targaryen, and would eventually hatch into the dragon Morning. At the beginning of the war, Rhaenyra was left too weak after her miscarriage to ride her dragon. In time she recovered, and once more mounted Syrax, as she and the other dragon riders of the Black faction flew to seize King's Landing, encountering little resistance. Following the city's capture, Syrax was kept within the walls of the Red Keep itself. A stable in the outer ward was emptied of horses and converted into her lair, where heavy chains secured her whenever she was without her rider. The chains allowed the dragon to move freely between the stable and the yard, but prevented her from taking flight. The remaining dragons of the Blacks were housed in the Dragon Pit, alongside Dreamfyre. Around the time of the Butcher's Ball, Sir Byron Swan set out in search of a dragon to slay. According to Mushroom, Byron died attempting to kill Syrax, a claim later supported by the testimony of his squire. Other accounts, however, suggest that his intended quarry was instead Vhagar or Sunfyre, leaving the truth uncertain. Syrax met her end during the chaos that followed the storming of the Dragon Pit. Prince Joffrey Velaryon attempted to mount his mother's dragon so that he might fly to the Dragon Pit and rescue the remaining dragons trapped there, perhaps even claiming his own dragon, Tyrax. Yet dragons are not horses, and Syrax would accept no rider but Rhaenyra. She threw the young prince from her back while still in flight, sending him to his death. By dawn, bloodshed consumed the city, with Syrax eventually flying to the Dragon Pit. Archmaester Gildane observed she might have remained high above the mob, destroying them with dragon fire, but instead she descended into their midst. dragons, slaughtering dozens with tooth and claw. The surviving accounts differ greatly as to how the dragon herself was slain, and Gyldayn declines to favour any one version of events. What is certain is that Syrax ultimately perished fighting the rioters. With a glad cry and a crack of her whip, she turned Meleys towards the foe. The writings of Gyldayn on Rhaenys Targaryen in the Battle of Rook's Rest, Fire and Blood, the Dying of the Dragons, the Red Dragon and the Gold. Meleys, known as the Red Queen, was a she-dragon first ridden by Princess Alyssa Targaryen, and later by Princess Rhaenys Targaryen. She possessed deep scarlet scales with pink wing membranes, whilst her crest, horns and claws shone as brightly as polished copper. Splendid and magnificent in appearance, Meleys was counted amongst the finest dragons of her age. By 75 AC, she resided within the Dragon Pit at King's Landing, still without a rider. That year, the newly married Princess Alyssa Targaryen resolved to claim a dragon. Though she initially wished to mount Balerion the Black Dread, the Dragon Keepers persuaded her that Balerion had grown too old and slow, recommending the younger and swifter Meleys instead. The advice proved sound. Meleys was renowned as one of the fastest dragons in Westeros, especially easily outpacing Caraxes and Vhagar. Alyssa delighted in dragon riding throughout her life. In 77 AC, she famously strapped her 9-day-old son, Viserys, to her chest before taking flight upon Meleys. 4 years later, she repeated the same feat with her newborn son, Daemon. Her partnership with the Red Queen came to an end in 84 AC, when Alyssa died following a difficult labour, leaving Meleys riderless once more. 3 years later, in 87 AC, Meleys was claimed by Princess Rhaenys Targaryen. Rhaenys rode her frequently, accompanying her grandfather King Jaehaerys during his royal progress, and insisting upon arriving at her wedding to Lord Corlys Velaryon in 90 AC astride her dragon. By the outbreak of the dance, Meleys had grown older and somewhat lazier than in her youth, though she remained both cunning and fearsome when roused. Rhaenys rode her in support of Queen Rhaenyra, and whilst the Velaryon fleet blockaded Blackwater Bay, Meleys patrolled the skies above to deter attack from the Green's dragons. Her final battle came in 129 AC at Rook's Rest. Answering the castle's call for aid, Rhaenys descended upon besieging Green army. Arrows and scorpion bolts struck Meleys but failed to bring her down, and she answered by unleashing dragon fire upon the soldiers below, burning hundreds where they stood. The attack, however, had been a trap. King Aegon II and Prince Aemond descended from the clouds above upon Sunfyre and Vhagar. Though hopelessly outmatched, Rhaenys chose to face them rather than flee. Archmaester Gyldayn observes that Meleys might have overcome Vhagar in single combat, but against both dragons she stood little chance. The three dragons met high above the battlefield in one of the fiercest aerial combats of the dance. Meleys seized Sunfyre by the neck, only for Vhagar to crash into them with tremendous force. Locking them together, the dragons plummeted from the sky, striking the earth so violently that stones were shaken from the walls of Rook's Rest itself. When the smoke cleared, only Vhagar rose unscathed. Meleys had torn away much of one of Sunfyre's wings before her death, whilst King Aegon II survived with devastating injuries. Meleys herself was torn apart by the impact, and beside her shattered remains lay a body believed to be that of Princess Rhaenys, burned beyond any recognition. The Greens carried Meleys' head back to King's Landing and displayed it through the streets upon a cart. Rather than celebrating the victory, the sight filled the small folk with dread. According to Septon Eustace, thousands abandoned the city in the days that followed, until Dowager Queen Alicent Hightower ordered the gates closed to prevent further exodus. Caraxes, better known as the Bloodworm, was first ridden by Prince Aemond Targaryen, and later by his nephew Prince Daemon. Red in colour, Caraxes possessed a lean and serpentine build that distinguished him from many of his kin. Though not amongst the largest of the Targaryen dragons, he was renowned as a fearsome and battle-hardened beast. By the time of the Dance of the Dragons, he became an old and cunning dragon. Whilst only around half the size of Vhagar, he remained one of the most formidable dragons in Westeros. Only Meleys was considered faster in flight. The exact date of Caraxes' hatching is not known, though by 72 AC he'd reached the size large enough for riding. That year, Prince Aemon, the Prince of Dragonstone and heir to the Iron Throne, claimed him as his mount. out. Even in his youth, the Dragon Keepers regarded Caraxes as the fiercest of the young dragons housed within the Dragon Pit, earning him the nickname the Bloodworm. Caraxes would first see battle during the Dornish War in 83 AC. Caraxes burned much of the Dornish fleet. 9 years later, when Myrish forces attacked the island of Tarth, Aemond once again flew to battle upon Caraxes, arriving well ahead of Lord Corlys Velaryon's fleet to aid Lord Cameron Tarth and Bormund Baratheon. It was during that campaign, whilst Caraxes was feeding upon a goat nearby, that Prince Aemond was struck in the throat by a Myrish crossbow and died of his wounds instantly, leaving the Bloodworm without a rider. By 105 AC, Caraxes had been claimed by Prince Daemon Targaryen, with whom he would become inseparably associated. Daemon rode the Bloodworm during the War for the Stepstones, carrying the prince through years of conflict against the Triarchy. Between campaigns, Daemon divided his time between the Stepstones and Dragonstone, where he frequently flew alongside Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen and her dragon Syrax. Following Daemon's marriage to Lady Rhaenyra Velaryon, Caraxes accompanied Vhagar on their celebrated journey across the Free Cities. At the outbreak of the Dance of the Dragons, Daemon rode Caraxes during the bloody capture of Harrenhal, landing the Bloodworm atop the King's Pyre Tower. Later seeking to end the war at its source, he challenged Aemond Targaryen and Vhagar to meet him above the God's Eye. The battle that followed became one of the most legendary duels in the history of Westeros. As the two dragons tore into one another high above the lake, Daemon leapt from his dragon and drove his Valyrian steel blade deep into Aemond One-Eye's remaining eye. Locked together, Caraxes and Vhagar plunged into the God's Eye, even as Vhagar's claws ripped open his belly and tore away one of his wings. The Bloodworm clamped his jaws around her throat and ripped it out, ensuring the mightiest dragon alive during the dance perished alongside him. Remarkably, Caraxes survived the initial fall. Mortally wounded, with his entrails spilling from his body and one wing torn away, he dragged himself from the water of the God's Eye and clawed onto the shore beneath the walls of Harrenhal. There at last the Bloodworm died, bringing an end to the life of one of the fiercest dragons ever to fly in the skies of Westeros. Arrax was the dragon of Prince Jacaerys Velaryon. Although his colour is never described in the histories, later information from George R. R. Martin identified him as a pearlescent white with a golden crest, bright golden eyes and yellow flames. Born from the dragon egg, placed in Lucerys' cradle by order of King Viserys I, Arrax hatched alongside the dragons of Lucerys' brothers, Vermax and Tyraxes. The king's decision was intended to silence those who questioned the legitimacy of Rhaenyra's sons, proving beyond doubt they possessed the blood of old Valyria. By the outbreak of the Dance of the Dragons in 129 AC, Arrax had grown into a strong young dragon, though he remained only a fraction of the size of the other dragons. When Queen Rhaenyra sent her sons as envoys to win the support of the Great Lords, Lucerys mounted Arrax for what he believed to be a short and safer mission to Storm's End. Before either prince departed, Rhaenyra made them swear upon the seven-pointed star they would serve only as messengers and take no part in the fighting. At Storm's End, however, Lucerys found that Prince Aemond Targaryen had arrived before him upon Vhagar and had already secured Lord Borros's allegiance. Unable to match Aemond's offer, Lucerys prepared to depart, but was confronted by his uncle, who demanded an eye in repayment for the one he had lost years before at the hands of Lucerys. Lord Borros refused to allow bloodshed beneath his roof, and ordered Lucerys safely escorted back to Arrax. Once outside the castle, however, Aemond mounted Vhagar and gave chase. The storm over Shipbreaker Bay robbed Arrax of his speed that might have otherwise had saved him. Pursued by a dragon 5 times his size, and hardened by centuries of war, the young dragon stood no chance. Witnesses upon the walls of Storm's End saw flashes of dragon flame amidst the lightning, before the two beasts vanished into the storm. 3 days later, the body of Arrax washed ashore beneath the cliffs of Storm's End. Sunfyre was the name given this dragon of the Golden Dawn. Writings of Archmaester Galdane on Sunfyre. Fire and Blood, the dying of the dragons, the blacks and the greens. Sunfyre, known throughout the realm as Sunfyre the Golden, was the dragon of King Aegon II. So magnificent was the beast that Aegon chose to depict the three-headed dragon upon his banner in gold rather than the traditional red, in honour of his mount. His scales gleamed like beaten gold beneath the sun, whilst his wing membranes were pale pink and his flames shone golden. Archmaester Gyldayn declared Sunfyre the most beautiful dragon ever seen in the known world. Though still considered young at the outbreak of the Dance of the Dragons, he was already a huge and formidable beast. Sunfyre first entered the war at the Battle of Rook's Rest in 129 AC, as Princess Rhaenys and her dragon Meleys descended upon Sir Criston Cole's army below. Aegon and Prince Aemond sprang the Green's trap, attacking Meleys upon Sunfyre and Vhagar. The savage battle left Sunfyre badly wounded, with one wing half torn away from his body. King Aegon himself had also suffered terrible burns and broken bones. Too badly wounded to fly, Sunfyre remained near Rook's Rest under heavy guard whilst his wounds healed. When Lord Wallace Mouton attempted to kill the crippled dragon, Sunfyre answered with flame and fury, killing scores of attackers before eventually disappearing. Though his damaged wing had healed badly, he nevertheless recovered enough to take to the skies once more. The dragon eventually made his way to Dragonstone, hiding amongst the caves and forests around the Dragonmount. Whether guided by instinct towards his birthplace or drawn to his wounded rider, no one can know. There in disguise, King Aegon would reunite with Sunfyre and gradually regain both his strength and his confidence. When Aegon's supporters seized Dragonstone, Lady Baela Targaryen escaped upon her dragon Moondancer and challenged the wounded Sunfyre. Though younger and swifter, Moondancer could not overcome the larger dragon. The two crashed into the ground after a fierce struggle where Sunfyre killed the smaller foe. The victory came at a terrible cost though. Sunfyre lost an eye, suffered dreadful new wounds, and was left unable to fly again. Not long afterwards, Rhaenyra Targaryen returned to Dragonstone, only to be betrayed and delivered into the hands of King Aegon. Before the eyes of her son, Aegon the Younger, King Aegon ordered Sunfyre to execute the captive queen. Roused by the scent of her blood, the golden dragon bathed Rhaenyra in flames before devouring her, leaving behind only a small part of her leg. It remains one of the most infamous deaths in the history of House Targaryen. Sunfyre never recovered from his accumulated wounds. Though King Aegon hoped his beloved dragon might one day fly once more, the great beast gradually weakened, refused food, and later died in 130 AC. Grieving deeply, Aegon later sought dragon eggs from Dragonstone in the hopes of raising a new Sunfyre, prouder and fiercer than the last. His wish was never fulfilled. Before another dragon could hatch, Aegon himself was poisoned, and with his death ended the story of the dragon whose beauty had become the stuff of legend. Vermithor, known as the Bronze Fury, was the dragon of King Jaehaerys I Targaryen. Bronze-scaled with great tan wings, he was amongst the mightiest dragons to ever live. By the time of the Dance of the Dragons, Vermithor was nearly 100 years old. Surpassed only in size by Balerion and later Vhagar, he remained a fearsome beast, yet one long accustomed to the company of men, making him more accepting of riders than many of the wild and unclaimed dragons on Dragonstone. Legends hold that Vermithor hatched from the egg placed in Jaehaerys' cradle by his sister, Rhaenyra, in 34 AC. He first appears in the histories in 42 AC, when he joined Quicksilver and Silverwing in lighting the funeral pyre of King Aenys I. 2 years later, after the death of Queen Visenya, Jaehaerys escaped Dragonstone with the help of his mother and sister upon Vermithor. By 48 AC, 9 days after the death of King Maegor, the young prince flew to King's Landing upon the Bronze Fury to claim the Iron Throne. During his minority, Jaehaerys and Alysanne famously fled to Dragonstone upon their dragons, where they would marry in secret. When Jaehaerys came of age in 50 AC, once again returned to King's Landing upon Vermithor to reconcile with Lord Rhaegar Baratheon, reminding the hand of the true power of House Targaryen by bringing him before the great dragon. Vermithor accompanied Jaehaerys throughout much of his reign. In 54 AC, he flew the king to Oldtown to oversee the peaceful election of the new High Septon, before continuing a royal progress through the Reach and Dornish marches. When news reached them that his mother, the Dowager Queen Alyssa Velaryon, was dying, Jaehaerys and Alysanne hastened to Storm's End upon their dragons, arriving in time to see her before her death. Even after the Dragon Pit was completed, Vermithor remained at the Red Keep beside Silverwing, rather than taking up residence within it. Bronze Fury also served in war. During the Third Dornish War, Vermithor burned the camps of the Vulture King, allowing Jaehaerys to end the campaign quickly. Years later, during the Fourth Dornish War, Jaehaerys flew beside his sons, Prince Aemon and Balon, upon their dragons, destroying Prince Morian Martell's invasion fleet before a single ship could land upon the shores of the Stormlands. When King Jaehaerys died in 103 AC, Vermithor was left riderless. Throughout the reign of King Viserys, the great dragon remained upon Dragonstone, making his lair amongst the smoking caverns of the Dragon Mount. By the opening of the Dance of the Dragons, the now old Bronze Fury had become one of the largest and most formidable still living dragons, awaiting a rider who would eventually claim him. The death of Viserys in 129 AC plunged the realm into chaos. Seeking to strengthen Queen Rhaenyra's cause, Prince Jacaerys Velaryon called for new dragon riders in what became known as the Red Sowing. Many attempted to claim Vermithor, but the great Bronze Fury slew those he deemed unworthy, amongst them Lord Gormon Massey. At last, the dragon accepted the blacksmith's bastard, Hugh Hammer, as his rider. Mounted upon Vermithor, Hugh fought for the Blacks during the Battle of the Gullet. Following the fall of King's Landing, Hugh's loyalty began to falter. At the First Battle of Tumbleton, he and Ulf White betrayed Rhaenyra, turning Vermithor, Silverwing and Tessarion against the town, helping to deliver one of the bloodiest defeats suffered by the Blacks. With both King Aegon II missing and Prince Aemon dead, Hugh's ambitions outgrew his allegiances. Believing himself worthy of a crown because he rode the largest living dragon, he declared himself king. His dream ended during the Second Battle of Tumbleton, where bold Jon Roxton slew him before he could even mount Vermithor. Though riderless, Vermithor remained a terrifying force. Wounded by knights who vainly sought to kill him, the enraged dragon took to the air and turned his fury upon friend and foe alike. There he was met by Seasmoke, and the two dragons locked in a savage struggle. Though Vermithor tore Seasmoke's head from his body, the intervention of Tessarion left all three dragons mortally wounded. Unable to remain aloft, his wings in tatters, the Bronze Fury collapsed and died upon the battlefield. Vermax was the dragon of Prince Jacaerys Velaryon. By the outbreak of the Dance of the Dragons in 129 AC, he was thriving and growing larger with each passing year, and despite his youth had already become a strong dragon. Vermax was known to become ill-tempered in the presence of snow and ice, and extreme cold. Though the histories don't record Vermax's colour, later depictions portray him with green scales. Like his brothers Lucerys and Joffrey, Jacaerys received a dragon egg in his cradle by the decree of King Viserys I. The egg hatched successfully, and the young dragon was named Vermax. When the dance began, Jacaerys mounted Vermax to undertake the most important diplomatic mission of the war. Flying north as his mother's envoy, he secured the allegiances of Lady Jane Arryn, Lord Desmond Manderly, and Lord Cregan Stark, each of whom declared for Queen Rhaenyra and the Black faction. The cold climate of the north proved unsettling for the dragon, and Jacaerys did not remain at Winterfell long. The full mushroom later claims that Vermax laid a clutch of dragon eggs within the crypts of Winterfell, but Archmaester Gyldayn dismisses the tale as highly improbable, noting that no other source records Vermax ever producing eggs. Vermax met his end during the Battle of the Gullet, as he descended upon the fleet of the Triarchy. Victory appeared close at hand, until the dragon flew too low. Whether wounded by a crossbow bolt or dragged down by a grappling hook, Vermax crashed into a burning galley. Jacaerys escaped the initial impact, but was shot down by Meera's crossbowmen, whilst clinging to the wreckage of a sinking ship. Silverwing was a silvery she-dragon, ridden by Queen Alysanne Targaryen, and, during the Dance of the Dragons, Ulf White, the Dragon Seed. Gentle by the standards of dragons, she is regarded as unnaturally tolerant of strangers, and was often seen resting beside Vermithor. Legend holds he hatched from an egg placed in Alysanne's cradle by her elder sister Rhaenyra in 36 AC. Silverwing first appeared in the histories around 42 AC, when she joined Quicksilver and Vermithor in lighting the funeral pyre of King Rhaenys Targaryen. 2 years later, following the death of Queen Visenya, she is one of the dragons to carry Alysanne and Jaehaerys away from Dragonstone, as the young princess and her family escaped captivity. After the death of King Morghul, she flew beside Vermithor and Dreamfyre as Jaehaerys claimed the Iron Throne. Throughout the years of the long reign of Jaehaerys, Silverwing accompanied the king and queen on countless royal progresses. In 54 AC, she flew Alysanne to Oldtown for the election of a new High Septon, where her landing atop the High Tower astonished the city. Later that year, she carried the Queen to Storm's End to be with her dying mother, and afterwards to Dragonstone to comfort Princess Rhaenyra. Even after the Dragon Pit was completed, Silverwing remained in the Red Keep alongside Vermithor, rather than joining the other dragons. Silverwing's most famous journey came during Alysanne's progress through the north in 58 AC. The dragon inspired awe wherever she landed, from White Harbour to Winterfell, yet she displayed a strange unease at the wall. Though Alysanne attempted 3 times to fly beyond it, Silverwing refused on every occasion, turning south despite never having disobeyed her rider before. The mystery of her refusal has never been explained. In later years, Silverwing carried Alysanne to the Eyrie to be with her daughter Daela during childbirth, and later back to Dragonstone during the estrangement between King and Queen, known as the Second Quarrel. In 93 AC, the aging Queen made her final flight upon Silverwing. When Alysanne died in 100 AC, the dragon was left riderless for the first time in more than half a century. Following the Queen's death, she returned to Dragonstone, making her lair within one of the smoking caverns of the Dragon Mount. There she remained riderless until the Dance of the Dragons, when Prince Jacaerys Velaryon called for volunteers to claim the riderless dragons during the sowing of the Dragon Seed. Though Mushroom tells of an unlikely tale of his own failed attempt to ride Silverwing, the dragon proved far gentler than many of her kin. She is not recorded as killing any of those who sought to claim her. In the end, she accepted the Dragon Seed Ulf White as her new rider. Silverwing first entered the war during the Battle of the Gullet, joining Vermithor, Sheepstealer, Vermax and Seasmoke in smashing the Triarchy fleet. At the First Battle of Tumbleton, Ulf White and Hugh Hammer betrayed the Blacks, turning Silverwing and Vermithor against the army. Alongside Prince Daeron's Tessarion, the dragons reduced Tumbleton to ashes. During the second battle, Ulf slept through the fighting, but Silverwing nevertheless took to the skies without her rider. She largely avoided the fighting itself, returning only after the battle had ended, to land beside the bodies of Vermithor, Seasmoke, and Tessarion. Later singers claimed that she tried 3 times to rise Vermithor's wing, though Archmaester Gildane dismisses the tale as no more than legend. When Ulf White was poisoned soon after, Silverwing became riderless for a second time. Attempts to claim her failed, with one knight losing an arm and another his life. She'd survived the Dance of the Dragons, and became one of only 4 dragons left alive at its conclusion. During the reign of King Aegon III, she abandoned the company of men and grew wild, making her lair upon an island in Red Lake, where she remained throughout the king's regency. Her ultimate fate is not known. They are all warm at first, but it does not last. Either I am unwelcome or too welcome. The murmur of the cost of keeping me and mine. But it's Dreamfyre who excites them. Some fear her, more want her, and it is those who trouble me most. They lust for dragons of their own. Rhaenyra Targaryen to King Jaehaerys. Fire and Blood, a time for testing, the realm remade. Dreamfyre was the dragon of Rhaenyra Targaryen, and many years later Queen Helaena Targaryen. Slender in build, she bore pale blue scales with silver markings, silver crests, and a pale blue wings. Hatched during the reign of King Aegon the Conqueror, Dreamfyre bonded with the young Princess Rhaenyra in 32 AC and became her mount a few years later. When King Aenys died and Morghul the Cruel seized the Iron Throne, Rhaenyra was reunited with Dreamfyre after secretly returning to King's Landing. Whilst her husband, Prince Aegon the Uncrowned, rode Quicksilver against the usurper, Rhaenyra remained behind, having just birthed twin daughters, Aeria and Rhaella. Aegon and Quicksilver were slain by Morghul and Balerion, below the God's Eye, leaving Rhaenyra widowed. To protect her daughters, she fled upon Dreamfyre to Fair Isle, remaining there until Morghul forced her to return to King's Landing, where he compelled her to become one of his black brides. The following year, Rhaenyra escaped once more, taking her daughter Aeria and Morghul's Valyrian steel sword, the Sword of Kings Blackfyre, to join her brother Jaehaerys. Dreamfyre proved to be exceptionally fertile, producing several clutches of dragon eggs in Rhaenyra's lifetime. One such clutch laid at Fair Isle caused widespread alarm amongst the island's inhabitants, and later attracted the interest of House Lannister, who sought to buy the eggs. Rhaenyra refused every offer, eventually granted Dragonstone as her own seat. She settled there with Dreamfyre, where the eggs later hatched in 54 AC. Rhaenyra discovered that her former companion, Alyssa Farman, had stolen 3 dragon eggs and fled across the narrow sea. She immediately informed the king. Together they prepared to destroy any dragon that might hatch in enemy hands, though such measures ultimately proved unnecessary. That same year brought further tragedy. Rhaenyra arrived too late to see her mother, Alyssa Velaryon, before her death, and soon uncovered the murders committed by her husband Andro Farman. After his suicide, his body was fed to Dreamfyre and the dragons of Dragonstone. Later that year, Rhaenyra's daughter Arya vanished after flying away upon Balerion the Blackdread. Mounted on Dreamfyre, Rhaenyra spent more than a year searching across the Seven Kingdoms, from Dawn to the Fingers, but found no trace of her daughter. By the time Arya returned to King's Landing, she was already dying from horrors she had encountered during her mysterious journey. Rhaenyra gathered her daughter's ashes, refusing to bury them on Dragonstone. She scattered them from Dreamfyre's back, declaring that Arya had wanted to fly. Following Arya's death, Rhaenyra withdrew into seclusion at Harrenhal, where Dreamfyre remained with her until Rhaenyra died in 73 AC. Thereafter, the dragon returned to King's Landing and made her lair within the new dragon pit, remaining riderless until she was eventually claimed by Queen Helaena Targaryen. During the reign of King Viserys, Dreamfyre accepted Princess Helaena as her rider. By the age of 11, Helaena was already flying the dragon she loved so dearly. The horrors of the Dance of the Dragons, however, shattered the gentle Helaena. After the murder of her 6-year-old son Jaehaerys, Helaena withdrew from the world, spending her days in grief and darkness. No longer did she take to the skies upon her dragon. Instead, Dreamfyre remained confined within the pit. It is said when Helaena finally cast herself from a window of Maegor's holdfast, Dreamfyre sensed her rider's death. With a roar that shook the dragon pit to its foundations, she snapped 2 of the heavy chains that bound her. Dreamfyre met her end during the storming of the dragon pit. One of the 4 dragons trapped within, she alone succeeded in breaking 3 of her chains when the mob burst inside. Taking to the air, she wheeled beneath the vast dome before diving again and again into the attackers below, slaying more rioters than the other 3 dragons combined. Eventually, arrows and crossbow bolts filled the air, while those she could not burn swarmed over her whenever she landed, forcing the great dragon back into flight. At last, wounded, half-blinded and maddened by pain, Dreamfyre hurled herself upwards into the dragon pit's great dome. The mighty structure cracked beneath the impact before collapsing into a torrent of stone, burying Dreamfyre and countless rioters beneath her. The dragon Seasmoke was first ridden by Sir Rhaenys Velaryon, and later the dragon seed Adam of Hull. A pale silver-grey dragon, Seasmoke was young, swift and agile. By the time of the Dance of the Dragons was already of fighting size and considerably larger than Tessarion. By 101 AC, Seasmoke had bonded with Rhaenys Velaryon. Following Rhaenys' death in 120 AC, the dragon returned to Dragonstone, where he remained riderless for nearly 10 years. During the sowing of the dragon seeds, Prince Jacaerys Velaryon sought new riders to ride the unclaimed dragons. Many hopefuls perished. At last, the 15-year-old Adam of Hull successfully claimed the dragon. Adam later protected his brother Alan from Sheepstealer during his own attempt to claim a dragon. Though officially acknowledged as Rhaenys Velaryon's bastards, many believed Adam and Alan were in truth the sons of Lord Corlys Velaryon. Whatever parentage, Corlys persuaded Queen Rhaenyra to legitimize both brothers, making Adam the heir to Driftmark. Mounted upon Seasmoke, Adam fought at the Battle of the Gullet and took part in the fall of King's Landing. Afterwards, Seasmoke was kept within the Dragon Pit, while Queen Rhaenyra held the capital. Following the betrayal of Hugh Hammer and Ulf White at Tumbleton, suspicion fell on the remaining dragon seeds. Despite Lord Corlys Velaryon's passionate defence, Rhaenyra ordered Adam arrested. Warned in advance, he escaped upon Seasmoke, as Corlys was imprisoned for aiding his flight. Determined to prove his loyalty, Adam launched a surprise attack during the Second Battle of Tumbleton. As the fighting descended into chaos, he engaged the riderless Tessarion, before turning his attention to Vermithor, who had begun to slaughter friend and foe alike. Though hopelessly outmatched, Adam threw Seasmoke against the mighty Bronze Fury in an effort to protect the men below. Tessarion soon joined the struggle, and the 3 dragons fought in a savage battle to the death. Vermithor ultimately tore Seasmoke's head from his body before collapsing from his own mortal wounds, while Tessarion also perished soon afterwards. Though falsely branded a traitor, Sir Adam died defending Queen Rhaenyra's cause, sacrificing both himself and Seasmoke to halt the devastation at Tumbleton. Their remains, alongside those of Vermithor, later became a grim curiosity at the rebuilt town. Tessarion, known as the Blue Queen, was the dragon of Prince Daemon Targaryen. She was a striking blue she-dragon, with dark cobalt wings, bright copper claws and crest, and vivid blue flames. Though the youngest dragon of fighting size serving King Aegon II's greens during the dance, she was swift, agile, and formidable. By 120, Tessarion had bonded with Prince Daemon, who was flying her by the outbreak of the dance. She first distinguished herself at the Battle of the Honeywine, where Daemon's arrival upon the Blue Queen saved Lord Aemond Hightower's army and secured a vital victory for the Green cause. Thereafter, Tessarion accompanied the Hightower host as it advanced towards King's Landing. Daemon frequently flew ahead of the army to scout, and the mere sight of the Blue Queen often caused Rhaenyra supporters to abandon the field rather than face the dragon. During the First Battle of Tumbleton, Tessarion again took part in the fighting, where she was left unchained and free to hunt. Following the disappearance of King Aegon II and the death of Prince Aemond, Hugh Hammer believed his larger dragon Vermithor gave him the strongest claim to the Iron Throne, more so than Daemon and Tessarion. Some amongst the Green Command, however, argued the Blue Queen alone would be enough to restore their fortunes. That question was never answered, thanks to the events of the Second Battle of Tumbleton. Prince Daemon was killed before he could mount his dragon, and Tessarion was killed in the struggle with Vermithor and Seasmoke. Stormcloud was the young dragon of Prince Aegon the Younger. Though his colour is never described in the histories and lore, George R. R. Martin has stated Stormcloud was turquoise, with black horns and claws. A dragon egg was placed in Prince Aegon the Younger's cradle at birth, from which Stormcloud eventually hatched. By the outbreak of the Dance of the Dragons, however, the 9-year-old prince had not yet taken his first flight. As the war worsened, Prince Jacaerys Velaryon resolved to send his younger half-brothers, Aegon and Viserys, across the narrow sea to the relative safety of Pentos. In late 129, the two princes departed Dragonstone aboard the Pentoshi cog Gay Abandon, with Aegon bringing Stormcloud and Viserys his own dragon egg. Their voyage ended in disaster when the fleet was intercepted in the gullet by the warships of the Triarchy. Faced with capture, Aegon mounted Stormcloud for the very first time. Though still young and untested, the dragon carried his rider to safety, enduring a storm of arrows and bolts in the process. Stormcloud succeeded in reaching Dragonstone, but only just. Countless arrows protruded from his body, whilst a scorpion bolt had pierced his neck. The brave young dragon died within the hour, hissing as black, smoking blood poured from his terrible wounds. Though Prince Aegon survived, the loss remained with him for the rest of his life. After Stormcloud's death, the future King Aegon III never flew a dragon again. Sheepstealer was a wild male dragon who roamed Dragonstone during the Dance of the Dragons. Named by the small folk for his habit of preying upon their flocks of sheep, he was one of 3 wild dragons living around the Dragonmount when the war began. Mud-brown in colour, he possessed a vicious temper when provoked, though he generally ignored people unless they threatened him. Whilst he regularly devoured sheep and the occasional sheepdog, he was never known to attack the shepherds. His egg hatched during the youth of King Jaehaerys, yet unlike most Targaryen dragons, Sheepstealer was never claimed. Over the decades of living wild upon Dragonstone, he'd grown increasingly wary of men, making him one of the most dangerous dragons to approach. During the sowing of the dragon seeds, Prince Jacaerys invited dragon seeds to attempt to claim riderless dragons. Of them all, Sheepstealer proved the deadliest, killing more riders than Vermithor, Seasmoke and Silverwing combined. Silver Dennis lost an arm attempting to mount him, whilst Alan of Hull barely escaped with his life. Only the bastard girl Nettle succeeded where so many others had failed. Rather than trying to master the dragon by force, she won his trust by bribing him with freshly slaughtered sheep every morning, until in time he accepted her as his rider. Mounted upon Sheepstealer, Nettles fought beside the Blacks during the Battle of the Gullet and the fall of King's Landing, before joining Prince Daemon Targaryen in the hunt for Aemond One-Eye and Vhagar from their base in Maidenpool. When Queen Rhaenyra later declared Nettles a traitor, she fled before she could be arrested, feeding Sheepstealer one final black ram before the pair departed across the Bay of Crabs. Sightings of the wild dragon continued after the war. Reports placed Sheepstealer first at Crackclaw Point, and later the Mountains of the Moon, where in 134 AC, royal soldiers encountered Nettles and the dragon living in a cave. The confrontation ended fire and blood, before the pair vanished deep into the Vale. In later years, mountain clans have spoken of a mysterious fire witch dwelling amongst the peaks with her dragon. Some maesters have even suggested that these tales of Nettles and Sheepstealer gave rise to their own traditions of the burned men, whose young warriors proved courage by offering parts of their flesh to the flames. Tyraxes was the dragon prince Joffrey Velaryon. Though young, he was healthy and growing quickly, is somewhat smaller than his brother's dragons, Vermax and Arrax. By the outbreak of the war, Tyraxes had become capable of carrying Joffrey on long flights, but was not yet large enough for battle. He's been described being a pale violet dragon with dark purple horns and purple flames. Like his brothers, Joffrey received the dragon egg in his cradle by order of King Viserys. The egg hatched successfully, and the young dragon was named Tyrax. Throughout the early stages of the dance, Joffrey repeatedly begged his mother to let him ride his dragon to war, but Queen Rhaenyra refused, believing both prince and dragon far too young. Instead, Joffrey and his cousin Rhaenyra were sent to the Vale, where he flew Tyrax first to Goldhound and then to the Eyrie under the protection of Lady Jane Arryn. After Rhaenyra's capture of King's Landing in 130 AC, Joffrey returned to the capital with Tyrax, who took up residence in the Dragon Pit. When the city later erupted into riots during the Moon of Madness, Joffrey desperately pleaded for permission to ride to his dragon's aid as the shepherd's followers marched upon the Dragon Pit. Rhaenyra refused, convinced the mob posed no threat. Defying his mother, Joffrey attempted to reach the Dragon Pit upon Syrax. Dragons only accept one rider at a time, and Syrax threw the young prince from her back, sending him to his death. Within the Dragon Pit, Tyrax fought ferociously against the attackers, killing many with his purple dragon flames. The mob eventually forced their way through a rear passage, where the dragon's chains became tangled and robbed him of his freedom to fight. Surrounded and overwhelmed, Tyrax was slain. Moondancer was the dragon of Lady Baela Targaryen, a beautiful slender dragon. She bore pale green scales with pearl-white horns, wing bones and crests. Though small, no larger than a warhorse, by 130 AC she was exceptionally swift, both in the air and on the ground. For much of the Dance of the Dragons, Baela remained on Dragonstone, only beginning to ride Moondancer regularly in late 129 AC. The young princess trained tirelessly, flying daily across Dragonstone, and even making journeys to Driftmark. When the dragon Grey Ghost was found dead, Baela boldly offered to hunt down the cannibal, the dragon believed to have killed it, believing Moondancer's speed could overcome the larger dragon. Sir Robert Quince refused to allow the attempt, unaware that Grey Ghost had in fact been slain by the wounded Sunfyre. When King Aegon II captured Dragonstone, Baela escaped her chambers, reached to Moondancer, and took to the skies, just as Aegon approached the castle upon Sunfyre. The two dragons clashed above Dragonstone in one of the final dragon duels before the end of the dance. Though far smaller, Moondancer's speed allowed her to evade most of Sunfyre's attacks, while tearing open his already mutilated wing. The battle turned when Sunfire's flames blinded the young dragon. Even so, Moondancer held herself into the larger foe, sending both dragons crashing to the ground. The fight continued upon the earth, where Moondancer's agility could no longer overcome Sunfire's size and strength. The young dragon was slain and devoured by her opponent, yet victory proved hollow. The wounds Moondancer inflicted were mortal, and Sunfyre succumbed to them before the end of the year. Morning was the dragon Lady Rhaenyra Targaryen. She bore pink scales, with black crest and horns, and by 135 AC, she had grown large enough to carry her rider. Morning hatched during the Dance of the Dragons, one of the last eggs laid by Syrax and taken to the Vale by Rhaenyra. News of her birth reached the Greens in 131 AC, and caused considerable alarm, for by then nearly all of their own dragons had died. Dowager Queen Alicent Hightower feared the hatchling would strengthen the Blacks' claim in the eyes of the realm, though Morning remained far too young to play any part in the war. She was one of only 4 dragons to survive the dance, and the sole survivor still under Targaryen control. After the death of King Aegon II, Rhaenyra brought mourning to King's Landing. The small folk greeted the young dragon with wonder, whilst King Aegon III, whose fear of dragons earned him the name Dragonbane, recoiled at the sight of her and ordered the creature removed from his presence. As morning grew, she made her lair amongst the ruins of the Dragon Pit. In the third moon of 135 AC, Rhaenyra finally took her first flight upon the young dragon, circling King's Landing before gradually venturing farther afield with each passing day. Though Queen Rhaenyra Velaryon delighted in Morning's presence, Aegon III continued to avoid her, prompting Rhaenyra to return with her to Dragonstone, where she believed they would be more welcome. Later that year, after the death of her husband, Sir Corwin Corbray, Baela Targaryen travelled to Dragonstone to ensure her sister did not seek vengeance upon Morning. In 136 AC, Rhaenyra hoped to accompany King Aegon III's royal progress on Dragonback, but the Regency Council persuaded her to abandon this idea. The fate of Morning is currently not known. Shrykos, was the young dragon of Prince Jaehaerys Targaryen. Although her colour has never been described, George R. R. Martin has suggested she was a copper-coloured dragon. Like so many of the dragons of House Targaryen, Syrax met her end during the storming of the Dragon Pit. Bound by heavy chains and unable to escape, she fought ferociously against the mob, inspired by the Shepherd, slaying 20 attackers before they finally overwhelmed her. According to the chronicles, the killing blow was struck by a woodsman known as Hob the Hewer. With each swing of his axe, he called upon one of the seven, and on the seventh blow, offered in the stranger's name, he split Syrax's skull and ended the young dragon's life. Syrax had never been ridden before her death, becoming yet another victim of the fury that consumed the dragon pit that day. Morghul was a young dragon of Princess Rhaenyra Targaryen. Although his colours were never officially recorded, some sources depict him as black. After Queen Rhaenyra seized King's Landing, Princess Jaehaerys was spirited safely out of the city, but Morghul remained confined within the dragon pit, alongside Dreamfyre, Tyraxes and Syrax. As Rhaenyra's rule collapsed into unrest, like the other dragons within the dragon pit during the Moon of Madness, Morghul was slain. He fought fiercely, burning scores of attackers before the mob finally overwhelmed him. The killing blow is credited to a huge warrior remembered as the Burning Knight, who is said to have driven his spear through the young dragon's eye even as Morghul engulfed him in flames.